Okay, I'd like to call to order the meeting of the St. Helena Asset Planning Engagement Committee, or better known as the SHAPE Committee. It's a little bit after, it's about 6:35, and if we can get a roll call.
And I think everyone's present.
Okay.
Unanimously.
All present and accounted for. If you're not here, raise your hand. Okay. All right. So that would bring us on to the next item would be if there's any public comment that people would like to offer up to the SHAPE Committee that doesn't pertain to what we're going to talk about tonight. So if there's something else you want to chat about, we'd be more than happy to hear from you. Okay, Andy?
Be sure and get the title of this document correct. In 2008, a committee much like yours was convened to study an economic outlook study group, it was called, and they addressed a couple of issues. What's the economic future of this town? What things could we recommend that would be useful? And then it just disappeared from sight as near as I can figure out, because I haven't heard any mention of this document in these proceedings. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. It was an all-star group of people who were called together. It was co-sponsored by the City of St. Helena and the St. Helena Chamber of Commerce. Obviously, it was a pro-business viewpoint, but they were dealing with how do we have a sustainable St. Helena as far as our finances are concerned. What should our priorities be? And they actually made a lot of, I thought, really good recommendations. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to do so. I've given 11 copies to Cindy, and she has the 12th copy. So I was hoping I could personally hand them out individually, but that's not the way it's done. But she's got the copies for you. Take the time to at least read the first page. And if that doesn't suck you into the rest of the document, I'd be very, very surprised. That committee did an incredible job. And I got my copy from one of the committee members. I don't know whether, if you can find them in the files, Cindy, that would be marvelous. But here they are. Read it. It lays the foundation for what you all have been doing for the past many months. They spent almost 18 months on their deliberations. So it's well worth your taking the time to have a look at it and see what you think of the recommendations. That's it.
Yeah, I know it very well. I was actually on the committee.
Page 14.
Bill Ryan was on the committee, and yeah, if you need any electronic files, I've got a battery of them. So it was quite an endeavor, and it went to city council, and it kind of fell flat, which has been a complaint, I think, in years past, that there were subcommittees and people would bring stuff to city council, and then nothing would happen at city council. And we're very hopeful and encouraged that when we bring our recommendations to City Council, it won't fall flat, that something will actually transpire.
While we're on that subject, I've spent with some guys 2.5 years studying these finances as well. We've recommended a hotel project. $20 million is the offering price that's on the table. And I just looked at this deal, and it's not even there anymore. Now, it was one thing for $1.9 million to walk out the door without acknowledging it. But we're talking about a $20 million offer on the table. I'm not saying I would take that offer. I would certainly look at it and scale it down, do some other things. But that's a serious offer.
Yep, we're going to talk about Adams Street later tonight.
Well, okay, I'm just saying it's not on that spreadsheet that even exists as a thought to be passed on. Okay. Appreciate
Thank you.
Your time.
Who was that?
Any other public comments before we get started?
May we ask who that was?
Andy Bartlett.
Andy Bartlett.
1286.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you didn't
Andy Bartlett.
find... Sir,
1286 Hudson Avenue.
thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
Okay, I'll close public comment, and then it's not on the agenda. I'm going to give a little spot here for Cindy has a public announcement she'd like to make. So,
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to announce that the City Council is seeking volunteers to serve on various boards, committees, and commissions. I brought flyers, I brought applications, and I encourage everyone to share the information and apply. you have any questions, you can reach out and get a hold of me.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move on to new business, which is to refine the options for the properties that we haven't yet discussed. And as a little bit of, we're going to start with some information that's pertinent to the properties, and it's a little bit of summary on the focus group. And I think Jean's also going to help us walk through all the properties once she gives us an update on the latest focus groups as well that support the property decisions we're making.
Thank you, Jean Holston, who's been working with you on the public engagement part. We conducted focus groups from Tuesday evening through Sunday afternoon, and then hurriedly gathered it for you because we heard that you wanted to have that information before this evening. So I want you to know that you've got the raw data, but you do not have a well-thought-out analysis. So I wanted to make sure that you're hearing that these are draft comments and summaries, okay? We had quite a few people show up to these, and there was vigorous conversation. There were not people that walked in feeling the same way about anything. I know that might surprise you. But and in the conversations, what ended up happening is that some folks shifted and some did not. But at least they heard each other, and that was powerful and important. So what we did is we took the recommendations that you had said move forward from those sheets of paper, and we put them all on this grid. We asked people to look at a preferred alternative. So the ranking is a little tricky because some people it was just yes or no. And sometimes it was, oh, these four are all good. Now rank them in the order that you think is the most important, 1 being the top priority, 2, 3, and 4 being the lowest. So those numbers will not add up. Some people chose not to rank. Some people did yes and no's. It was variable. Some folks took these home and brought them back. People paid attention to this process. So, and then we asked them to weigh in on the timing. So if they wanted something, when did they want it? So that you could just have a sense of what people thought was really important and needed to be done right away. And then we asked them to weigh in on financing options to see if folks were at all interested in looking at other options beyond general revenue, okay? And then comments. And the comments have all been typed and part of the reports that you've gotten. So there's a couple of things that have come out in this. One is that there are some questions that folks really want responses to or hope that you are considering as you do your work. And I've listed those for you. I just want to make sure that you're aware of them. There's 3 slides of questions. Hot topics that came up again and again and again in these. One of them was Main Street and the parking on Main Street and the idea of being able to support businesses on Main Street. There was a lot of concern that businesses on Main Street are supported and that parking is a challenge and a problem. The library is a very hot-button issue. There is a tremendous love for this library where it is and the way it serves the community. Housing got brought up a lot, which I know is not what you're doing necessarily, but there was not one group where that didn't get a lot of time and effort and energy in terms of there's no workforce housing or affordable housing, when what they meant by affordable housing was kind of middle class, something that's acceptable to folks that are working in this area or have younger families or at the beginning or middle parts of their careers. The wine train, and this was very interesting, as I listened to people talk about the wine train, what I heard said over and over again was, we think we might have shot ourselves in the foot with that. That having a wine train that stops in St. Helena and that would have foot traffic and support the businesses on Main Street and be around is something that we are interested in exploring again. And they surprised themselves in saying this, and some of the folks explicitly said, I was against it, I fought it, I thought that was very successful, and now I'm going, oh my God, we blew it. So that was something I think you guys have talked about a lot. That was really important. There was a lot more of a call for leasing over selling property, unless there's a real serious need and the property is of minimal use. But a desire to not lose city assets prematurely, and certainly not unless there's another option. And then there are some specific to buildings, which I will bring up when we talk to them. But there was certainly, on a few of the buildings at least, there was much more of a consensus than we had seen in the last focus groups and in the public information groups. So we'll bring those up when we get to the specific buildings themselves. So, and then the last thing that I want to say about the focus groups is every single one of them appreciated how serious you're taking public engagement. We're thrilled that there was an opportunity to be part of a focus group, to come to these meetings, to see these meetings, to interact with you, that there's healing needed from previous processes where folks have felt blindsided and felt like they were invited to be a part of it, and then a particular project or vote was kind of snuck through without the promised ongoing public engagement. And so there is just a tremendous respect, but also for the amount of work you're doing and the amount of time and effort that you're putting in. There is a lot of appreciation for you and respect for what you're doing for this city. So I want to make sure you know those pieces. So you want to talk about, are there any questions or comments?
Do we have the demographics?
They're on one of the sheets you've got there. It looks like this. It's got tables on the front of it. Definitely still low on the younger folks, but better than we had before. And by the way, younger folks in St. Helena means 60 and under. Just wanted to make sure you knew that. But we still got some. Okay. And also, just so you know, the folks that came spent at least 2 hours with us. Many people stayed longer. They stayed longer, they talked to each other, they filled out these forms. This really was something that people took very seriously. So for tonight, the invitation is, and the purpose is, like your chair said, to limit some of the recommendations, to try and get down to maybe 2 or 3, or in like you did last time, maybe 1 for some of these buildings if that's possible. So that's the goal. Last time what we did is we went through the options and then you voted. And anything that had a majority moved forward. If it didn't get a majority, it didn't move forward. What you have here tonight is not only citizen engagement, and so last time what we did is after we talked through the recommendations, you guys talked some, then you had public comment, and then you voted or finished your conversation. Tonight you also have some department heads, some of your city people here, in case you need some other input. So the finance head, the library, public works, park and rec, your police chief, and your city manager, and your city clerk are here. Did I miss anybody? No. So in case there's questions or other input that you need. So in some of the communication I had with you, the invitation was to make sure that we're being as succinct as possible so that you can really move through this and whittle some of this down. When I say, and we talked about this at the last meeting, not getting in the weeds, what that means is really getting into operations. So the city manager and the staff will be dealing with whatever operations there are. Designs of a particular building. I think in broader terms, the amenities are helpful, but not whether an amenity should go there or not, because that really is the weeds and not what this committee is charged with doing. The broader concepts are crucial. But that's what I mean by weeds. So the invitation is also to really make sure that everybody gets heard. So to have 2 or 3 minutes to say what you think about a particular building. You also wrote some things out, which is helpful, because I think some folks were saying, I'm not quite sure what this means, so having something in writing is just fabulous. Thank you for doing that. But is that all right with you if we go through and go building by building and see if we can't? We want you to ask each other questions, absolutely, and to disagree or to see it differently, crucial. But I think there's been a lot of testimony about some of these ideas, so unless it's something new, can we just leave it at what's previously been talked about and or what's in your writings? Because people now have those and you guys have them. Will that work? So City Hall. The 4 recommendations that you have moving forward are, 1 is leaving City Hall where it is, but tearing it down and completely rebuilding, possibly a 2 or 3 story building. Second one is moving City Hall to the library. The third one is moving City Hall to another existing building. And the fourth one is rebuilding City Hall on Adams Street.
What about it?
This is this large sheet, which is a consolidation of your recommendations.
Is that the same as the smaller one, Gene?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You ready to weigh in?
I'm ready.
I'll jump in.
Oh, here.
Yeah, I could jump in. One of the things that we... Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say that one of the things that we, with City Hall particularly, was the one place that we divided into 2 groups. So realistically, these are not entirely the individual ideas, and so it'll be worth revisiting a couple of these ideas, because I never got to hear what the people who weren't at the back table said about them and vice versa. So that's part of what this discussion, I think, will end up weeding some of this stuff out.
Well, I'll begin with my mind. And what Gene said with criteria, with the number 1, is my thought is we need to rebuild on Main Street, make it a 2-story or 3, reducing the footprint to maybe make more parking in that area back there, and while rebuilding, move the City Hall to the Railroad Avenue properties while it's being rebuilt. And when we get down to the Railroad Avenue properties, I'll tell you my other thoughts on that. But that's what I think that we should do, is rebuild on Main Street. Let the city decide which way they want to face the building, but have the City Hall and police as our very first priority to get this started right now.
Since I agree with Suzanne on this one, if I could just jump in and embellish a little bit, the idea of which direction the building is going is a conceptual idea, because part of the purpose of rebuilding the City Hall on that spot is to make it an engagement between the park. Right now it's a concrete block wall that faces a park, and what we need to do, it seems to me, is make that park sort of the front yard of the City Hall, the grounds of the town square around the City Hall. And so if we change the direction in which we enter the building and put it facing the park, go into the park and then go in and have a plaza there, that would make some sense. Because the idea partially is to bring people up from Main Street, to make this a park that's been re-landscaped and incredibly beautiful as a whole, with an incredibly beautiful, well-designed architectural structure that's our new City Hall. And it seems to me that that's valuable. Some of the other additions, the things that are going to be in that building, would be city council chambers, partially because it keeps that place alive during the nighttime, as would a conference room that would be used sometimes for public service events and sometimes for other people might want to use it. Again, another reason to keep that building alive at night. And when it's relit and redesigned and that park is as a whole part of the unit, the beauty of our central civic place, then I think that's going to be a different thing than it is now, and be very, very valuable to the city. And again, paying for this, it's not going to be inexpensive to do this, but it's a need, it's a first priority, it seems to me. And I think the answer to paying for it is probably the same one you have, and it deals with the wine train and what you were talking about with the wine train and how they might come to serve us, not just drop off passengers here, but drop them off with a point that's very important to the city. And we'll get to that when we talk about or revisit the teen center, unless we're not going to do that tonight, and then we can run through that in about 1 second now, if you want to do that.
No, it's later.
We'll get to Railroad Avenue when we get to Railroad Avenue. Yep.
Well, there we go. Actually, that's my third choice of the three options. And first of all, I want to thank all of the members of the committee, because my views have changed from all of your contributions over the last weeks. And I'm in a very different place than I was when I began. I hope many of you are as well. I have read the material by the library board, and I have read a very excellent article in the Star by the young lady who now has joined the team, very highly credentialed, and we really appreciate her service. But I am feeling that the library building has become an icon in the city, and I would hope that the public and the city council, particularly the library board and those who are invested in the library building, would take a step back and think about what that library could be. There was a time when it was in the Carnegie Building, and I'm sure that at that point people were, oh my, we can't leave the Carnegie Building because it's an iconic setting and all of this. And in the 1970s, they built a beautiful building, and it probably has served the city extremely well. But that doesn't mean that the library has to be static. There are references to spaces that are very beautiful, and there are also spaces that are extremely crowded. There are services that are well handled, and there are others that are crowded, cramped, and could be better served in a different setting. So my argument is that that the City Hall should be moved to the library. The library should become part of another building, probably a building on Adams Street. So that is sort of my proposal. In my write-up that I sent around, I've given the advantages and disadvantages. My second option would be to see if there is an opportunity to purchase a building. Essentially, that seems to boil down to the Catholic Church. We have no idea whether that would work or not. Big advantage there is, if it is priced right, is that we could keep the city staff in the same place until a build-out is accomplished, and that would be a lot easier on staff. But my third option then is to tear down and rebuild on Main Street. I think there's an opportunity to either have some property on Main Street with a future use, or the possibility that that could be developed in some way or added to the park. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
So just so I'm clear, so Glenn, your first choice, which is moving City Hall to the library, what would you do with the City Hall property site once you've moved out of it?
At this point, the building would come down. It would be available for the city to do with what it deems appropriate, whether that is building a commercial building or expanding Lyman Park to be more of a full park, or adding some other services. I don't know.
And where would police go?
Where would the police would? Well, my suggestion on the police department is that it be moved back toward the parking lot, possibly biting into Lyman Park a little bit, trading off some of the city administration space. That is, once the building is torn down, giving Lyman Park some of the space that is now occupied by City Hall to compensate for any space that was used by the police department. But I would have a separate police department and I would have it with the other safety services.
I think I'll read mine now because I think, Glenn, you may have just changed my mind a little. So I'm going to comment on City Hall first. Remodeling would not save money and might cost more. It should be rebuilt. There's something to be said for either using the current location or building on Adams Street. During this whole process, I've liked the idea of having City Hall where it is. But there's a real advantage to using Adams Street, and it sort of goes along with something that Glenn just said, and that is that the city employees could be kept where they are now, and when the Adams Street new City Hall is built, they only move once. Every time you move all the staff in a City Hall, it's very disruptive, and it would cost money if you were to put the staff of the City Hall, say, in the Catholic school building or any building. You're going to have to rent that space for, I don't know how long it takes, 6 months to a year to build a new City Hall. So there's something to be said for either its current location or building on Adams Street. I could support either one. Cosmont has shown us two different bond strategies that could be used to pay for this new building. There's broad community support for a new City Hall, and so I think it's something that we need to go forward with. It should include a conference room that could be used by service clubs for their monthly meetings at no cost. I know I belong to the Federated Women's Group. The Rotary pays money to rent space for their monthly meetings. Kiwanis and the Seroptimists all pay money, and these service clubs do a tremendous service to our community. And so I think that it would be a better and easier sell to the public for whatever we have to do to finance building a new City Hall if there could be a space in there that's used regularly by people from the community and not just the City Hall staff. If City Hall's built on Adams Street, the current site could be leased for a source of revenue. I say let the market decide what should go into this spot. You know, it could be parking. You could have metered parking. And the city could split the meter revenue with whoever builds the building. I don't know, it could be any number of things. But as I'm saying, I think the market, you should, put out a proposal for it and let the market decide what would go there. The police station, I really, when I wrote this report, and some of you have read it, I believe the police station should be housed in the same building as the fire station. That building is really underutilized. It's going to be more underutilized when Human Resources, which is housed there now, goes into the new City Hall building. I said it may require a second story. I noticed that Mark Smithers said that's not feasible to build a second story. I don't know that for sure.
Well, you can build a second story, but you lose downstairs space because you got to put an elevator in, and you lose upstairs space, and you can't put anything over the kitchen.
Nonetheless, it could be done. This plan may not be attractive to either the firemen or the policemen. I understand that there might be a little conflict there. I won't go any further. But if that's what is identified as the most feasible plan, then maybe Gene would have to work with them to work it out. I don't know. But I would hope that would happen. That's what I have on those two buildings.
I just wanted to comment on City Hall. When we first started this process, it seemed like City Hall was the most apparent thing that needed to be fixed and either rebuilt or moved to a different site. And originally I thought, too, it could be either where it's at or it could be on Adams Street. Those were kind of my two heads and tails of the coin. And the more I thought about Lyman Park, the more I thought we really need to have a building there that represents civic pride and something that is integrated with the users that would use Lyman Park. And I don't believe people that go to City Hall, I go there frequently myself, would necessarily go and then use the park. I think we need to have a building there that has a symbiotic relationship with the park, and I think no matter how beautiful you make a City Hall there, or which way you face it, or what you do to it, it won't achieve that. So we're really shortening the ability to utilize Lyman Park by putting the wrong building in that space. I think we can have a beautiful building there, but I think we need to take City Hall and put it over on Adams Street in its own building, and for the time being, let city staff stay where they're at, build a new building on Adams Street, let the library stay there until, the public has a chance to weigh in on what they would like to do with that building. But for the time being, we just fix City Hall by building a new one. And then when City Hall's finished, we put some type of cultural or event center there that would start to achieve some of the vision Doug talked about, which is, attracting people from all over the planet to have these conferences and have these shows and have these, theater type things that benefit our town by people staying in hotels and being part of the tourism that we need to help drive the city economy. And that building could double and triple in its use based on, the Federation Women's Group meeting there, or other groups meeting there, or classes, or whatever it might be. But I think having a cool civic building there tied into Lyman Park would be a great anchor for our town. And I think having City Hall on Adams Street is a good use of a resource we have over there already.
I guess I'll go next. I'm not going to talk about my proposals for City Hall for just a minute. I actually put together 5 distinctly different ones that are complete packages, so I took a slightly different tack. I think it's our role to present to the community and to City Council a diversity of different options to spur a discussion at that stage. So I have each one of my 5 is anchored by a different use or location for City Hall. I would rank them if forced to, but I think they just represent 5 different options. In putting those together, each one of these 5 proposals, they share some common elements. I spent a lot of time looking at the focus group and the workshops and all of that feedback to try to reflect what I think I'm hearing from the broader community on what we're supposed to come up with here. And in doing that, these are sort of the principles for this and for everything else that we're going to discuss tonight that fed my proposals. First of all, City Hall, I think there's a pretty clear consensus that we need to either rebuild it or find a much better space for them. There didn't seem to be a strong preference on where it goes, maybe a slight leaning towards Main Street in my reading of it. So for that reason, if the people of the town said they definitely want it here, I would have gone that way, but I don't read that. There's a lot of energy for community serving, maybe cultural center type of things, but my reading says that people don't particularly want that on Main Street. So my proposals largely put that sort of functionality on the Adams Street Library location. Preference for the library is to leave it where it is, but there's a lot of comments to make better use of the space. People want multi-use and efficient use of the facilities, make sure we pay for maintenance. On Adams Street, city center, community center, make sure that we preserve a fair amount of open space there. Maintain the solvency of the city and good fiscal management, and in general, try to hold on to assets and don't sell them. So that was sort of the basis for everything I did. So now back to City Hall. I pretty much picked everything that was on that list and even threw an extra one in. Build a new one on the site, co-locate it with the library space, build a new one on Adams Street. The new option is build a new one on the Railroad CDF Teen Center site, and then put it in another existing facility like the Catholic Church or similar if they're out there. With all of those, as I said, I tried to create more of a community serving space on the Adams Street property, the corner of Adams and Library Lane as some sort of an entryway with nice landscaping. I'm not going to try to define what the design would look like. I just think that's the place to do that, and try to connect it to the existing library space. We could probably reconfigure that to provide better entryways, windows, doors over there, so that you created sort of an indoor-outdoor combination that served the city for indoor meeting spaces and maybe a coffee bar or whatever, and beautiful outdoor spaces there. I would also propose to at least put together a team to look at the cultural center idea, and this is more of the what I call the Doug Barr version of a cultural center, that is something that attracts kind of big events, musical programs or thought-provoking meetings or whatever, but don't commit to it. Let's test it out, see if it works. Let's use space at Napa Valley College, at the Performing Arts Center here in the high school, test it out, see if there is an appetite for that sort of thing, and if there is, then we can look for sponsorship to put it on Adams Street and sort of extend that community serving space and integrate it with that. So that's kind of where I stand right now in City Hall, and I'll come back to the other properties when we get to those.
I'll jump in.
So, well, wait, because I wasn't clear on what you were saying your priority for City Hall was. These four.
I said I didn't want to rank them. You want me to give a priority?
I mean, is there one of the four that you favor at least?
Probably of the five. I'll give you the top three. Build a new one where it is. Build a new one on Adams Street, or co-locate it with the library there, which would be a significant redesign of that space to basically split it and redo it so that you could put them both there.
All right.
And in almost every case, I think other than the Catholic Church one, I would put the police either next to or with the fire station.
Okay, I'll narrow it down. I have two. It's leave City Hall where it is, which is what I was thinking before. After going over the focus group, the visioning and the focus group, I started to think more about putting it on Adams Street. In my mind, I've thought of Adams Street, I just want it to be open and beautiful and a natural spot. But then when I went back and looked at what was done and how it looked, I could see that spot, it could fit in there and be more of a city center. And you can consolidate some of the city buildings and have them there. It also looked like there was room for the amphitheater or some of the cultural elements that Doug has talked about. So now I'm leaning towards that way, of course, always trying to maintain the views and the natural landscape as a part of it. So I'm still, I like both ideas. I'm maybe moving a little bit more towards having it be over at Adams Street. I really like Joshua's idea and vision for a library, so that it could be so much more. I don't think that, from everybody I've heard, I don't think we have the support for changing anything at the library. I personally love the library. I love the services there. So I would love to, if there was enough money, to work with the library foundation and say, what do you want it to be, and the staff there, and provide that for this community and have it be so much more. But if we have limited resources, I know right now we have to focus on City Hall, so that would be what I think needs to happen first.
Somebody?
Yeah, I'll go. I'll be succinct. I'd like to move it to the library. I know it's relatively untenable for a lot of people, but I prefer to play the long game. And I think that the community needs an asset in the library that's better serving for the community, that can carry us into the future. And I think we can save a hell of a lot of money by not building a new city hall and utilizing the library building. So it's my 2 cents.
Dan or Oliver, you guys want to go?
I'm recuperating from 2 hours of tennis. I'll go after.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. I'm Stan Knight. My draft report starts out with a recap, as I understood it or understand it, of the input and the priorities from the community focus groups, which I think has been terrific, and also priorities for community amenities that have surfaced in our extensive meetings. And those are listed on my draft recommendation as factors that should all be checked off in some shape or form in wherever the facilities end up. So I've got, it's about a dozen bullet points of community requirements that should each be addressed in some shape or form in the facilities solution in the long run. Examples of these are youth activities space for scouts and summer programs and Head Start and teens, some appealing natural gathering places, community meeting and event space.
You know, Stan, everybody has the written document.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how you wanted to cover that.
Could we just go with the building? With
Yes, of course.
Where you are with
Of
City
course.
Hall?
Yep.
And the police?
I'll roll it up. My thinking right now is to tear down and rebuild City Hall where it is, but in line with some of the other comments so far, I think it should be kind of a hybrid facility that's integrated very closely with the park, and have some community space or some community magnet space on the ground floor, and then upstairs have city administration. So it would be kind of a hybrid community center with some user-friendly space. It would architecturally be oriented toward the park, as we've talked about, I think, some of us. I think the police department should be split off. There are a lot of issues with that portion of the building, as we know, as we saw. Ideally, I thought it would be nice to have the police department adjacent to the firehouse, but short of that, I thought it might be possible to relocate the police department in a low-rise, soft-profile facade building where the current CDF building is on Railroad. A lot of parking in the back. It's maybe 75 yards from the fire department, 100 yards from the fire department. So I would relocate the police department into a new facility and tear down and rebuild on the site of the City Hall strictly for city administration, combined and integrated with some public uses that opens out to the park, some kind of plaza. And I guess a footnote to that would be possibly to relocate planning and building down to what's currently the teen center. Put that may be one department that could afford to be off-site slightly, half a block away down at the end of Railroad. Easier for contractors to get in and out, et cetera.
Thank you.
So tear down and rebuild at the same site.
My last?
Mark as well.
Go ahead, Mark.
No, I'm last.
How come?
I'm the chair. I let you wait me out last week. So
No,
this
I
week
know.
I get to wait you
I
out.
played 2 hours of tennis. I'm really tired right now, so I'm just, oh my God. I was just imagining a scenario in San Francisco. I'm sure everybody's familiar with San Francisco, where let's say that City Hall was in Golden Gate Park and the De Young Museum was on Van Ness, and something happened to City Hall, like an earthquake hit it, and they were wondering, should we put City Hall back in Golden Gate Park, or should we move it to the museum on Van Ness and then rebuild a whole new museum in Golden Gate Park? And if you think about it, it would be intuitive to say you would want to build a new museum in Golden Gate Park because of the natural synergy that I think that Jeff is talking about. When I was thinking about the issue with Adams and City Hall and Lyman Park and everything else, a couple of years ago I was like really fixed in the idea of a cool cultural center at City Hall because I didn't see the relationship of City Hall with Lyman Park. It's bureaucracy and a park that has different functions. In fact, the first community center of St. Helena was Lyman Park. It was called Turner Hall, and that's where all the games and concerts and activities were. So when I was imagining a cultural center at City Hall and moving City Hall out, then I got a little backlash from the library saying, well, wait a minute, you're stealing our thunder because we're becoming kind of a de facto cultural center, community center ourselves, and so this puts us in competition. And then I started thinking, yeah, you're right. So maybe they should be the same. And so it would be easier to start with a new building going forward for the future to serve the needs of the community with a library that they can go into those areas when they're trying to address like multimedia presentation rooms, big LED screens, learning centers, bringing 3D printers. So the library has moved into a kind of a de facto cultural center program because the world has changed. We've gone through a digital revolution. Books are not quite as relevant as they were, and just like vinyl records, and now we're moving into a digital world, a world of the internet, and then of computers, and a different kind of approach going forward. And so when I was thinking about City Hall going into the library, it was because of the location switch where I thought that the library and the cultural center would best shore up Lyman Park, if there'd be a natural relationship, and then it would shore up all of Main Street, because Main Street is going sideways. I don't know if you know, but we have a lot of empty buildings, and the digital revolution has also gutted out a lot of Main Street. So I don't look at St. Helena like, here's my pet project or here's my sacred cow. I look at it all together like it's all mine. It's my library. It's my Main Street. It's my park. And so I think if we could just open up and realize that all these assets are ours and we need to share them and not hold on so tight onto one asset, because you can't imagine a new combination, I think we're going to be just stop dead in our tracks. We're not going to get anywhere because everybody's going to take their fiefdom and not let go. But if we could just open up and say we're not attacking the library, we're trying to envision a new library that can fulfill the kind of needs that in the direction that it's going, and have a whole acre of green park next to it. Right now the library doesn't have an acre of green park, And so, and the other idea of City Hall going to where the library is, because City Hall has no relationship to the commercial aspect of Main Street. I know we have the pride and everything else, but there was a big battle to move it there. Is that my time?
Yeah, 3 minutes are up.
There was a big battle to move City Hall to where it is now. I mean, I read reports and talked to people. It was a contentious battle. So every time you move the chess pieces around, everybody goes into tilt. So we're all kind of used to that. So my attitude is, you're going to hit the hornet's nest, you might as well hit it hard and get it right. And so I think what it is there's got to be an assurance to the people from the library that we're not gunning for the library, that we're coming up with a better plan for the library, better buildings. I can imagine, just like the way Apple Computer teaches people how to do their apps, there's a huge learning center with big LED screens and big open, beautiful spaces. That's what I can see for the library. That can't be built in the structure it is.
So are you talking about then the fourth option of rebuilding City Hall, maybe on Adams Street, but
No, I know,
large
because
cultural center
I think
on-
what's missing here is in all of our arguments, who's paying for this? So I'm approaching this as though I don't want anybody to pay for any of this, I don't like the idea that we're going to go to the people with more sales tax, property tax, or whatever, or loan, or bond, whatever. I think we're moving into an age of uncertainty right now with the change of the tax structure. We're going to be going into recession. I hate going to the public for money. And so I would rather sell part of Adams to help finance this move, and to mitigate the cost, simply move the City Hall long-term into the library and build something great for 6,000 people on Lyman Park instead of 25 employees. So it's kind of like being under the constraints. You only have so much money, And I'm not a real big fan of going and borrowing and raising taxes. I'm trying to figure out how to do this without that kind of impact. And yet get a win-win. Because I really think that, you see, I was on the board of the Napa Valley Museum up there in Yountville. We were out of sight, out of mind. And when you're out of sight, out of mind, you lose all that potential revenue and recognition and patronage from visitors. If you put this on Main Street, you have a chance where if you bring in really important speakers or you bring in an important project to this culture center, center.
Well, it's actually repeating everything you've said before.
Well, no, I'm trying to justify why it's so important to have this cultural center at this site, because I'm bringing in the visitor component, which will help finance it and give it the recognition it needs. It's an important aspect. If you turn your back on visitors, you're turning your back on a tremendous potential of revenue, recognition, and patronage that you might need to get the kind of really great programs that you're looking for.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to sort of go over all these options a little bit and what my thinking on those. I'm very strongly in favor of rebuilding City Hall where it is. I think it's been there for a while. It's a history of town. I think having City Hall there keeps a number of municipal functions together. You got the fire department, you got the police department, you got City Hall, you got the post office right across the street. I've actually visited a lot of towns where there's a nice park next to City Hall. So that's generally the genesis of it. I have trouble moving the City Hall, other than my respect for the library. I have trouble moving City Hall into the library more from a financial standpoint. It's going to, we've been told it would cost, upwards of $4 million to repurpose the thing to put City Hall in there, and that doesn't include the police station. So then you're going to spend another $2 million on the police station. So now you've remodeled something, and effectively you've spent $6 million when you can build something brand new, for 7.5 and have something that people in town are proud of, and something that's aesthetically pleasing, and a fantastic place for the employees to work in. So I struggle with that. And then depending on how you really want to look at it, if you do put a cultural center on Main Street, you're moving, I guess, the City Hall to the library. Library is going to become called the Cultural Center. I'm not sure exactly how it works right now. The library is, 17,000 square feet. One could argue if it's a little bit too big or not. I don't know. I don't think it is. The EMG report actually said that it was the appropriate size, and then when you consider the circulation there and the visitor counts and all that, I mean, we're many multiples higher than what happens in a town our size. So I think the size probably is appropriate. I don't think, the library has become a little bit of a city center, but I don't think they want to take on performance arts and other humanities type activities, and I don't think they put on art exhibits there. So I don't think they're really becoming the cultural center. But the other thing you have to consider, if cultural center goes on Main Street, I don't know where all the parking goes. Right now, City Hall needs some parking, but it certainly doesn't need the parking you need if you're going to have 150 or 200 people at a cultural center. There's been discussion that you could then put underground parking, at Main Street under the cultural center. But if you want 200 spaces, that's going to cost at least $4 million. So so now you're saying, depending on how you want to look at the $4 million, is the $4 million in addition to the $4 million you've spent fixing, the library, and the $2 million for the police station, now you're at $10 million versus we can have something for 7.5. I mean, it's another way to look at the math. And I understand I do go down to the Napa Valley Wine Library or the Napa Valley Museum down at in Yountville, and I think it struggles because it's completely away from everything. I mean, there's really no other attraction there except for all the wonderful people at the Veterans Home and occasionally the Lincoln Theater. But I mean, if you have a cultural center on Adams Street, that's not so far removed from everything. I mean, it's not. The those two aren't, I don't think, consistent. Moving City Hall to an existing building is kind of the similar problem I think you have with moving it to the library. There's going to be a whole lot of costs associated with it, and now you're just working with, something that's been remodeled, and it doesn't really work very well. And rebuilding the City Hall on Adams Street, then, you're leaving Adams Street, open, and I think now you've taken up valuable space at Adams Street. And when I hear what people sort of envision for Adams Street, I think they want less buildings and more open space. So if you had City Hall there, and now you got a cultural center, so I don't think that one works very well. And I'm also looking at, the latest focus group information that we have, because at the end of the day, this is really about the community. And certainly, I think we've given the community a lot of information, so I wouldn't remotely even suggest that they're coming up with ideas that aren't very well thought out. And, if you look on these four alternatives, the first one, leave City Hall where it is, tear it down, rebuild, 2 to 3 story building, what we've been talking about. It's overwhelmingly, that's what this focus group folks wanted. I mean, it's 13 to 4. You look at move City Hall to the library, there's nobody that wants to do that in these focus groups. There's 22 people that solidly said no. Move City Hall to another existing building is 4 to 13, and then the fourth one is 2 to 17 no. So I guess if I'm listening to the community, and I'm also listening to my own thoughts on how well City Hall works where it does today, I think it's very clear that having City Hall where it is today and building a new one is the right choice. So that's my...
Mark, did you calculate what it would cost to rehouse the employees for the 6 months to a year it would take to rebuild City Hall?
Well, first off, I don't think you have to rent anything, because I think you can use more of the Railroad Avenue properties in the CDF building. You might need to do something. Mark would better be able to answer that. Maybe a few people might have to go to the Carnegie building, but I don't think we at all have to rent anything. So now you're just talking about moving them, and I think, whether you move them to a new location, or whether you move them out and move them back, so you're really only talking about one extra move. So it's maybe $100,000, $150,000. I mean, but in all of what we're talking about here, we're talking about spending $20 million. So I don't think that should be a deciding factor on whether you were, that to me isn't a deal breaker, that they'd have to move out somewhere temporarily and move back. So, yeah. So anyway.
Gene, could I don't have any, I sort of want to deal tangentially with what you said, and that is that if we present people with the idea of the library building and moving it, unless they have a plan that they can see, an architectural design, a participation of the library board in the design of the building, a real commitment by the community to what that building is going to be, then we're going to get 22 to nothing votes. And so I think it's a little bit off the mark to take the focus group information and say that has to be our guiding light, that it's up to the city council to take whatever recommendations come from this committee and begin to put real designs together, and and I think that will be their next step, is going to be putting flesh on the bones.
Can I address something? So
Sure.
What you're talking about. So just in general terms, is the library, the new library area, is it 5 or 10,000 square feet? Do you have any? I mean, because right now it's 17, and I think okay, maybe one could argue maybe it's supposed to be 15, whatever. But I mean, is it 5 or 10?
Well, we've talked about a big building.
No, but I'm just talking. Hang on. I'm trying to understand the library's portion of the big building.
I have no idea. What we have now is a library of a given size. Let's assume that that's the size that we need. And I am perfectly content with the idea that the big building is the library with augmented spaces for just the kinds of cultural activities that they are already carrying on. I'm concerned that we're talking about a cultural center as though it's just going to be more entertainment for tourists. And I think we should be focused on the services that the community wants to consume. And they can get TED Talks on their computers. So, to launch off into stuff like Aspen and all these other places and start thinking giant thoughts, I think is way premature.
I'd like to suggest that we're getting way off. We're getting way off.
I do want to address something, though. So if you believe the numbers and you're at least at $6 million to do a police station, somewhere, and $4 million of retrofitting, remodeling, and configuring the library, so you're at $6 million, even disregarding the $4 million for parking or whatever else you're going to have to do on the Main Street property. But if you're building a new library, if it's 17,000 square feet, that's $10 million. So now we're going from a $7.5 million city hall to effectively almost a $17 million city hall, because you're building two buildings now when you just have one. And even if it's 5,000 square feet, which I would not suggest that it probably could be 5,000 square feet, you're still at $9 or $10 million versus a $7.5 million city hall. So I'm struggling with the math. It doesn't.
Can I suggest that you go to public comment and then continue your discussion?
What did Mark say about police department?
Well, no, if you move City Hall to the library, you got to put the police department somewhere.
I'm not saying that. You said you wanted to see City Hall stay where it is, and in which case, do you want the police department in that same building, or do you want it somewhere else?
Well, no, you're tearing down City Hall and the police station. To me, it's all one big building.
I know that. Where are you going to put the police department?
Probably, it may be on the north side of the fire station. It may be back on the south side of the fire station. It's somewhere on the Main Street property. It needs to be on this side of the tracks, I think. I don't think they want to have to worry about crossing the tracks, especially if the wine train's there, right? If the wine train shows up and the police have to go from somewhere on the east side of the tracks, that's going to be a big problem.
Can I just jump in? If we're going to start
public comment right before you get.
I know, but I need to make a rebuttal to some things, because $3-4 million to remodel the library, it was an error because it was talking about putting on a second story.
I don't know about those details, but I think you can get into that after the public comment.
Okay.
Right?
When we talk about the library.
Right, and we also have the library as the next building, so we've kind of gone.
And the police station.
Right. So City Hall and Police Station, public comment?
So we'll open up for public comment.
If it's okay, can I request that we hear from the police chief, if he cares to comment? That would be lovely.
It's always nice to get requirements from the key users.
Hi, I'm Bill Ryan, and once again, I'm in awe of the incredible amount of work each of you are doing for us, and thank you for that. I was on a focus group deliberating a little about having a little chance to discuss and debate some of the things he sent over to us. And I thought that our little group had a good handle on the library function. The group was nicely balanced, I think, and interested, and I felt a strong coalition of the whole group when we got finished with it, and we said, separate the library function from the building. Don't get confused by do we need a building or do we need a library function. We need to do it, and we need a 21st century library function, and it seems to be different from the one that worked when we built that building. So there was no effort to diminish the function of the library or diminish having a library for our city. We all loved it. I used to bring my grandchildren over there to see the bubble guy. We had a guy that did bubbles. We had a guy that brought wildcats. But don't preserve that building for bubbles and wildcats. If we should have bubbles and wildcats, they ought to be where they ought to be, not just stuck in the library because we don't have any other place for it. But I urge you to not get hooked on what to do with that building or where the library should be. I think our first step is to hire a library expert to tell us how to have a perfect library for St. Helena. Tell what it looks like, what it costs, how many books you got to have, how many gadgets you got to have, and everything can fall out of that clearly and easily because the library is entwined with almost everything that's been said tonight. Thank you.
Did you want to weigh in?
We're not doing the library yet. See, I knew this was going to happen.
We're actually doing the City Hall.
I'd be happy to comment on a couple things and answer any questions that you might have, but I want to start with Pat's comment about the fire department and the police department. I think we know who would win that. But some of the comments I heard, I think one of the important ones was staying on the west side of the train tracks. I thought that was a good comment. The other thing about moving the police department somewhere while a building is built on site for the city hall and police department, the current site, is entirely feasible. However, something to keep in mind is that we have to have a secure detention facility. We also have to have a secure evidence bay. And that might actually be more important than the detention facility in a temporary location. It has to be something that is that can't be broken into. And if we have to devise some other way to temporarily house somebody that's in custody, we can certainly do that. But the evidence bay is really the thing. I'm happy to answer any questions.
And thanks for taking a moment. We were on a tour going through your building, and there were some different things that were being fixed. You know, the locker rooms, the painting, the walls, the bathroom. It was kind of like you had to give up one thing to get another. And one thing that would be helpful is to understand is how many people would you project you would have moving forward as police officers, and how much room would you actually need for locker rooms? What would your ideal building look like as we were starting to look at options of where you may end up? Because that would be helpful, right? So I don't know if you have an answer for that, or if you could think about it and get back with us about that.
I can certainly, if you're looking for an estimate on square feet, I really don't have one. I'd like to, ideally you would project out for a 50-year building, something that we'll be talking about in 50 years, how to replace it. But and in that time, I have no way of knowing how many officers we might have. Right now, we're too small for the 12 officers that we do have. The locker room that you were talking about, and the reason we had to do that is we hired another female employee and literally didn't have a locker for her, and so we had to convert some space to create a ninth locker. And of course, this is beyond my scope, but if I had two more officers, which I really would like to have at some point in the near future, I wouldn't have a place to put them. They wouldn't have a locker to use, and I wouldn't have a room to put a locker into. Okay. We really ideally could use a detective and a school resource officer. We also could use two more sergeants. So these are idealistic proposals, I realize that, but if we're just throwing stuff out there, we're probably 4 bodies short. We're certainly down 2 bodies from where I started 10 years ago. We never recovered those bodies, and so 10 years ago there was a need for those bodies, and now there's a need for even more.
And how many police cars do we have that function on a daily basis here?
We have 5 patrol cars. One of them is dedicated to the supervisors because it has some specific equipment in it that the officers don't carry. We also have one that's dedicated to the canine officer for obvious reasons. So we really have 3 patrol cars that are available for the officers to drive. The idea there is that at any given time, one of them might be down for service. So we have
Do you have any extra equipment, trailers, or other kinds of special things that are stored like at the corporate yard or things like that that might need to be taken into account?
We do have a dual sport motorcycle. The community service officer has a small pickup truck that she uses. Of course, I have my car. We have a training car that the officers use when they go to and from training, travel. And then the Police Officers Association has a 20-foot enclosed trailer that belongs to the association, but we right now park it behind the fire station. It has all of our bike rodeo equipment in it.
So you need 10 parking spaces more or less for the equipment that the police department has, and then you need some spaces so when people come to work they can park there also.
Correct,
okay.
yeah.
Thanks. Awesome.
Sure.
I hope you get your other officers.
Me too, thank you.
Just a minor footnote to that, I heard a figure of 3,600 square feet, not including the secured parking areas outside. But there's the physical interior space, somewhere order of magnitude 3,600 square feet is a number that I'd heard.
Of our current space?
No, of a future, much more desirable space.
Can I ask one question? If you had the dream police department, is there any objection if it was 2 stories?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Our only concern would be what would be on the second floor, and the suggestion there would be administration. So you're not bringing prisoners in and out of a second floor.
But foosball, pinball machines, I don't know. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no, second story. There are a lot of police departments that are 2-story. Napa is a great example.
Okay.
Jokes aside, is there an adversarial relationship with the fire department?
Absolutely not. No. We have a great relationship with them.
So if you were housed with them, if that could happen, that would not be a problem?
It would not be a problem at all. It'd have to be a separate facility. They wouldn't be allowed to have access to our secured facility.
Well, there's a way to do that within
absolutely.
a building.
Yeah, if we wanted to share an admin building and you come in the door and you go right to the police department, you go left to the fire department or something like that, absolutely. Yeah. That would work.
You could use the same workout room together.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe different times, same room.
Thank you.
On the issue, thank you, Chief. Just a quick comment question. On the idea of a 2-story facility being acceptable, this is something that had been in my mind, but it's such a hot potato I hadn't brought it up. But the idea of creating a very attractive youth space in another location, such as Crane Park, for Scouts, the venerable Troop 1, and putting a modern police facility with a second story where the Scout Hall is now, adjacent to the firehouse. So I'll just put it out there. Don't anybody shoot me because I'm a Scouter myself. But just looking at it from a holistic view, I thought physically the Scout Hall parcel would be ideal for a police department.
Also, I had an idea and nobody jumped on, but I'll ask you if you liked it. And in my early deliberations about City Hall and Police Department, in my imagination, I had the police department on the lower level, and coming off of Del Britton Way, I had parking within the building so that when you brought a prisoner in, you could pull right in to that parking space, get out, and not have to be on the street at all, and take them directly into the holding cell. I thought it was a good idea.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I know that the committee's talked a lot about the library because it was one of the options of moving, but in terms of the public comment, I'm thinking we stay with the City Hall because the next building is the library, so that if your comments are directly related to the City Hall options, but specifically library stuff at the next building, because that's the next building you're going to.
Right, so we're not going to do public comment for the library now. We're going to do it when we look at the next building.
Except where it relates to City Hall.
Okay.
Vicki Bradshaw. I'm a resident of St. Helena, and I went to one of the forums, and I'm going to kind of go tandem with what Bill said. Our forum was 100% behind having a library. We were not 100% having the library at the library building. And we were 100% agreed that it was a volatile issue. We were split, 50-50, maybe more for looking at doing alternative uses with the library building than we were for the library building. And while we agreed that 17,000 square feet was larger than the normal library for a city our size, which I think is about 5,700 square feet, and our library has a higher traffic rate, but we also have a higher cost, and we were willing to look at that. We are, every resident, and we pay $188.08 per capita for keeping our library open, where every other city in Napa County other than St. Helena pays $3.59 per capita, and every other city in the state of California with 10,000 people or less pays $9.14. So while our library, we all love having a library and we want a library, we just have to recognize that the large footprint creates a larger expense structure for the city, and we thought it was reasonable to at least look at it as a possible alternative for a city hall site or some other site, not to the exclusion of having a library, but simply to look at it as a possible alternative. So it wasn't 22 necessarily to 0 in favor of keeping the library. It was 22 to 0 to make sure we have a library, but not necessarily in that building. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for all your work on this arduous task. It's much appreciated. I just wanted to encourage you from, well, my 2 cents, not to worry too much about our city hall being, the most amazing.
Most of us do know you, but if you could state your name.
Oh, Ann Navarro. Yes, thank you. The city hall being sort of the icon or the symbol of a phenomenal city. Most people are going in there like next door to pay tickets, pay permit fees, find out they can't do something on their house when they're doing planning. It's not a place where people are getting married and there's joyous occasions. I don't know if our city hall has to be anything other than a working business. It needs to be safe. It needs to be secure for the workers that are there. And I don't think they really care that much. I don't mean to speak for anyone, Mark can, but every time I was in there, which was a lot over a 4-year period, people were just working. They're just working. So they just need a clean, decent, safe office space, and I'm not sure City Hall has to be the icon of St. Helena. So I would recommend, my 2 cents, is to just build what we need to build and not have to have yet another. We have Behringer, we have the Culinary Institute Greystone, we have a beautiful library building, we have our main street, which is architecturally historic and cool, we have vineyards all through town. We have a lot of things that mean St. Helena. I'm not sure we have to build a city hall for a lot of money that also means St. Helena. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more public comments for the City Hall property site? Okay. Close public comment.
So now it's back to that discussion stuff that you want.
I feel compelled to do my comments first because of what's been said about the library.
Are we moving to the
You gonna
library?
talk
We're going to do the library now, right?
No, we're gonna finalize the discussion of City Hall.
Oh, okay.
And then we're gonna decide. We're gonna hopefully winnow down the alternatives. So, if anybody has anything else they want to say about City Hall site, or ask anybody any questions about proposals that folks had, now would be the time.
I would just say, in terms of financing, I think that if we're talking about building a city hall, it's going to be all public financing. And if we're talking about moving city hall, the expense is going to be public financing. And sorry, it's hard not to talk about the two together, but if financial options on the table are move City Hall and we build a new library, I think that you'll find with the right vision a great deal of philanthropy to try and make that happen.
I'm not so certain that public financing is the way to do it. The public would be financing it if we use is the option that makes the most sense to me, which is to sell the teen center and the CDF buildings, which are completely underutilized properties. And the first place we should look for that, we brought this up before, so I won't harp on this, but the idea is that we can do what we've been talking about. The trains wanted for years to drop passengers off here. We've denied them that right. Some people say we shot ourselves in the foot, and I think perhaps that's correct because we didn't allow them to do that. This would be an opportunity to give the train people who are hoteliers, it's the Noble House group of hotel builders who own that train, the opportunity to drop passengers here to expand their business, give them potentially the right to build a small boutique hotel on that, a station hotel a la Europe, and let them know that that will also be within walking distance of a cultural center if the cultural center ends up on Adams Street, and if it's a big enough imagination that we have to build something really special back there. So all of that would increase their business, and theoretically we could get top dollar for that, whereas if you try to sell it otherwise, just any RFP that you put out there, it's a pretty unappealing property. It's an odd little
We're getting to that
design.
Property in a little bit.
Okay, I understand that, but we're just talking about financing here.
well-
So that would be a way to partially pay for financing.
Well, here, okay, if I can make a comment about financing, it's all fungible. We're not going to be saying we're going to sell the Railroad Avenue properties to fund City Hall, or we're going to, use the general fund excess cash flow to build some. I mean, we're going to come up with proposals, we're going to come up with packages, and then we're going to look at the timings of that and the spending, and then we're going to look at the long-range financial forecast, and we're going to look at other options that have been laid on the table, which may include selling off a property or leasing properties or whatever. We're going to fold that in, and then we're going to look and see if we're short. Because you also got to look at the timing. I mean, none of this stuff may start for 3 years. Well, if we don't run our budgets high and spend all the excess cash flows we're going to have in 20 and 21, we're going to build up some money. So it's all fungible. It's not going to be specific financing. Okay. Huh?
On the
I don't know if anybody else has anything to say about.
Well, I just want to say that it doesn't make sense to me to put City Hall, which maybe doesn't have to be grand and an architectural statement, but it needs to be new, in my opinion, and to take that function and put it into a building that was built in 1976 doesn't really make sense to me.
I'm with you, Pat. I think we need to have the imagination to think of that City Hall not as it is, which is a mausoleum that's dark at night. It's a place where people leave at 5 o'clock and it goes black, and it's next to a park that hasn't been maintained the way it should be, and therefore none of it's beautiful or interesting. You have to have the imagination to see that as a place that if we work at it, we can, remembering the fireman picnic, the potluck picnic that the whole town was at in that park. When you think about what could happen in that park as part of the civic function, when you talk about Pat's idea about having groups, Rotary Club, Kiwanis, people who are meeting there so that it's alive at night and it's alive all day long and it's serving civic functions outdoors and indoors year-round, then it's not just a building closing down. And you have to remember that if you're going to put a cultural center there, there's a fire station next door and a police station, and you'll never get any kind of serious entertainment to come there or serious people to come there and do conversations because you're going to have sirens going off.
The real problem I see with keeping it on the property that it's on now is there's no parking. And when meetings like this take place, when there's a city council, planning commission, chamber, I mean, sometimes this room is absolutely packed. I don't know how many people that is, 60, 70 people. I don't know where those people are going to park. If City Hall is rebuilt on the site that it's located now, and I'm not opposed to that, somebody has to determine where we can have parking that's close by to that City Hall.
I had a thought on parking, Pat. Thanks. I agree that parking is totally inadequate at the moment. But looking at City Hall, where it is now, and integrated with Lyman Park, my idea was to carve out some parking, maybe 20 spaces plus or minus on the railroad end of Lyman Park, for additional parking that could be used during the day, and then when it's not in use in the evenings, that could also be kind of a satellite parking area for people going down to Main Street.
We've had there's been some big public gatherings at the police department when we were going through the general plan update and some other types of meetings, and
At the police department?
at the fire department. And I think people found parking on Railroad, and they found parking in the parking lot across the street, and some of them parked on Main Street, because the green zones are okay after hours. And so I think from a city hall standpoint, granted, we'll probably actually gain some parking, but I don't think we have to have parking for 50 or 60 or 100 people provided there, versus if you had a cultural center, you need upwards of 200 when you have a big event and you have a play and you're filling the house.
Well, I
Maybe
wasn't
even
thinking
more.
of it as versus a cultural center. I was simply thinking that when there's a city council chamber and planning commission meetings or meetings of this sort, that there would be more parking needed than there is now. I know I've had real trouble parking when going to those meetings in the fire department building in their conference room. I don't think that's a given, and I think that you have your opinion and I have mine, but perhaps there's someone who's an expert in that kind of thing who could determine whether or not more parking is needed, and if so, suggest where it could be built. I'm saying it's a factor.
I think parking's a factor, absolutely. I think in a central location, though, you might get more people walking and riding their bike in, too. So, at any rate. Any more comments?
Yeah, I want to kind of follow up on what Glenn said about, with these focus groups, it's hard to get the right response if they can't visualize alternative concepts, which is like a model being built. So the problem I've had with this SHAPE committee is that we've taken on the scouts, we've taken on the library, we've taken on different groups of people without getting their input on it. So it's a little bit like the cart before the horse, because you can start to freak everybody out and agitate them like, what do you have in mind for our future? But I'm trying to look at this, though, this is the one-time great opportunity, instead of just simply rebuilding City Hall where it is and ending up with the same relationship with Lyman Park, which is really a dead synergy. It's just going to be a continuity of what we already have. So there's not going to be any upside. Wait. So it would be great if the library folks were brought into the discussion. What would they like? What can they imagine as far as a futuristic library?
That's the next building.
Well, I know it is, but the City Hall and the library, they're kind of in the same crosshairs. I mean, it's hard to separate them now because we're rationalizing keeping City Hall where it is or moving it. And so City Hall can function actually anywhere. You can't move Lyman Park, but you can move City Hall functions anywhere. And the other thing about the library building is it can't be used for anything else but civic use. So we have these constraints that we got to kind of work within to understand what's the optimum situation.
Oliver, we did get a letter. I don't know if you saw that, the letter that we got from the chairpersons of the library board. So I'm assuming they're speaking for the board of directors of the library and probably even, most of the community at that point in time. And they said they wanted the library to be where the library is.
So
did you see that letter? I don't know.
No, but, I would expect that, I mean, that's...
I know, but I assumed if they were willing, if they were considering that there were other options available to them that they were interested in, then they probably would have made that communication.
Well, I think that's kind of assumptive. I don't know if they really were given all the alternatives, I mean, if they were given the option of a brand-new library with all these facilities that could take them into the future and make them more serving the community in a greater way, I don't know if they've really seen that possibility. I don't know if all of us have really looked into that.
They did write that letter.
Well, of course, the status quo has always got to take the hard line. That's always the given.
Can I finish my sentence?
Yeah.
They did write that letter after they heard what all alternatives were for City Hall and the library. So they did write it with that knowledge.
Right, and that's the cart going before the horse. That was what I was worried about, that we were making these movements of the chess pieces and without really talking to the parties involved who would be affected by it. And so it's going to be a natural reaction,
Are we ready to vote on these recommendations?
I think so.
So the first one of leaving City Hall where it is, but tearing down and completely rebuilding.
Gene, just for clarity, are we voting not for our opinions of whether this is a good idea or not? We're voting for whether this is an idea that's worthy of going to the city council. They'll decide, right?
Correct.
So this isn't whether
Correct.
we like it or not. It's whether it's worthy to go to the city council.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you.
What's the reference document, Gene? Is that the matrix?
There's just the 4 recommendations that are on here that are on this large piece of paper. Yes. There you go. So leaving City Hall where it is, tearing it down and rebuilding it.
And I think last time you said we could vote more than once?
Yeah, we have to.
Oh, yes.
Right, I mean, you can...
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So, all those in favor of carrying that forward?
What are we doing?
Voting on whether this is worthy to go to city council.
Leave the city hall on the site?
Yeah.
So there's 7, which means it's more than half, and that goes forward.
I don't want to vote for one unless if it's just strictly City Hall. I agree with tear down and rebuild, but I favor a hybrid solution at that site that would some of the conversations we've had about having some community space on the ground floor, for example, so that it doesn't go dark at 5 o'clock, as Doug said.
I think we could build that into the language that these guys
Well,
write.
and there also are meeting spaces in the space planning. There were meeting spaces.
Right, and I had suggested that there be a gallery for the Historical Society on the
I'm
ground.
assuming that if it's torn down and a new building is built, then there would be a whole conversation about what
Right.
goes in that building.
What goes in there.
Right, but this is what you're dealing
But the
with,
focus
is
is City
rebuilding it
Hall
there.
and the
Right.
police station.
Right.
Okay, thanks for the clarification, just that the sub bullets under number 1 exclude some of these key features that I don't want to see fall through the cracks.
Again, it would go to a whole different process if it moves forward to a new building that's rebuilt.
We're talking about a box called the City Hall and the police station, and when this goes to City Council, trust me, there will be more discussion, then there will have to be RFPs, and there will be design work, and there will be more discussions, and then there'll be public input, and then, I mean, so it's the concept of, do we want City Hall and the police station to be rebuilt on the Main Street site?
I would vote in that case to delete 1C.
No, okay, we're not
doing that.
Forget the...
Well,
the
police station is a pretty big chunk of real estate, and it's included in number 1, and I don't think it should be.
Well, that's the alternative, so then I guess don't vote for it.
No, actually, I agree with him. I think the City Hall and the Police Department should not be together here. I think they should be separated.
It's the City Hall and the Police Department on the Main Street facility, and maybe the police department ends up to the north side of the fire department, maybe it ends up on the south side of the fire department, but it ends up on that property.
Okay, would that include incorporating into the fire department building?
It says that on option 1.
That's a whole other discussion.
Okay.
Well, it looks like it says, it looks like it says keep the police department integrated with the City Hall at that location.
Now,
So let me
the police
just-
station as part of this building, or moved to or attached to the fire department.
I'm sorry, too many people talking to me at once.
Actually, in some ways, it doesn't matter, because there's 7 votes that move it forward.
So it says or move to the fire station, it should just say or moved to another location.
Let's move it forward. Can we go to option 2?
Yes. It moves forward anyway, Stan, that conversation can happen at a later time, but it has enough votes to move forward.
Okay, I'm just concerned about how binding or how locked in concrete the concept will become if one of these options is
It's
approved to move forward.
Okay.
It's not locked in concrete. It is so loose. What we are sending to City Council is so loose. Everything's going to get changed.
I'm just trying to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Move
so-
City Hall
wait,
to the-
wait, so did we finish?
There were
Because
7
I thought there was a
votes
question,
for it.
So some people weren't voting.
We got it.
There were 7 votes for it already. Does
Okay, so
anybody
Stan's
want
not
it?
voting for it? Is that?
I'll vote for it, subject to amendment later.
Yeah. There you go.
Then there's 8. Then there's 8. Second one is moving City Hall to the library. Who wants that to go forward? 1, 2, 3, 4 votes.
Now, I want a little clarification on this one, because I proposed moving it there and co-locating it with the library. Other people have proposed moving it there and building a brand-new library somewhere else. Third option is you could move it there and move the library to another existing building like the Carnegie Building, and those are all quite different, and what it's packaged with makes a big difference to me on whether or not I'm for it or against it.
Well, let's just see if there's enough votes with or without yours. How many people want to carry it forward? Well, just hold on. The way it is written right now, in any kind of concept, moving City Hall to the library space. 3, 4, possibly 5, right? That doesn't carry. Needs 6, right?
Oh, really? Oh, my God. Okay.
So even if you voted for it, that's only 5 votes. So am I doing this accurately?
Is that what it takes?
Okay,
All right, well,
so that one drops off.
I'm going to go back to an original comment I made. I think by trying to winnow down City Hall too much at this point,
Right.
everything else is connected to it, and we're going to end up with 2 grand proposals because it so constrains everything else. And I think we're potentially doing a disservice to the rest of the conversation and to the diversity that we present at the end of this by winnowing this hard this early on the City Hall property.
Tim, can I
we
offer
might find
something?
out that the library, some version of the library option has very nice attributes when we start looking seriously at financing and other things that make it come back into play, and I'm just worried that...
So can I offer something?
Sure.
Can we skip number 2 for just a second? Let's go to 3 and 4, just to see what's there. I'm going to come back to 2. Okay? Can we do 3 and 4 and then come back to 2? Because
Okay.
I want to offer something up, but I want to see if something crystallizes here.
And remember, these are just the things that you're going to carry forward that are going to be recommendations to the City Council, who gets to have its own process. So,
And all the alternatives will be reported.
yeah.
But anyway, if we can do 3 and 4, I have something to offer up.
Can I just ask, what's being submitted to the council is just going to be the majority opinion? Is there any minority opinion? Or
I don't know,
diverse
you haven't
opinions?
decided that yet with
Well,
your writing group.
There will be discussion about the alternatives for each of the buildings, and to the extent that there is a strong majority issue on one of the alternatives that didn't float, then it'll be at least discussed.
Yeah, it seems
It
like
might not. It may not. The minority. If something didn't make a majority, it may not be in the, in the proposal that includes the financing calculations.
Well, I mean, only because you were saying you don't have 6 to make the cutoff. And what was that about?
Why don't we drop the rhetoric of if it doesn't make the majority vote, it's off? I think the City Council is capable at looking at 4 options for City Hall, but it'd be nice if they knew what the votes were. Is that appropriate? Then we're not cutting them off at the knees with...
Well, we do want to
multiple
try and
options.
reduce the options because the matrix of putting the
council
packages
members are
together
shaking their
becomes
head no.
exponential.
Well, this whole matrix... Okay,
I worry that when I asked Oliver, I was surprised that Oliver didn't vote for the first one, because it certainly has all of the reasons to go to the City Council to make a decision on this. It should go. I fully am opposed to his personally, but I do believe it has the value that it should probably go to the City Council. It seems to me we have 2 notions
Well,
here.
here's
that both
what
could go
I
to City
here's
Council.
what I was going to try and offer about number 2 is maybe number 2 is there's an option of placing a cultural center on Main Street, but without suggesting that City Hall is being moved into the library. That you would look at options for what would happen with City Hall. Would City Hall, you can have a second. Number 2 could be the idea of a cultural center on Main Street with City Hall potentially going to either another building or being built somewhere else.
I would just like to say that out of all the buildings that might have an extra suggestion or two attached to it, City Hall is probably the one that could withstand having a few extra ideas thrown in there. So I don't know, when we talk about whittling down, maybe when we get to, Signorelli Barn, we might want to truncate that list a little bit. But I think for City Hall, we're 11 people who've been looking at this for the better part of 6 months. We have a lot of different ideas, and they change sometimes by other people's opinion. Why not just give City Council some great ideas to work with? Because each one of these has an element that works.
Exactly. Much as I don't like the idea, I still think it's worthy of going to
So
City
I think
Hall,
we
and
should
that's what
vote.
we're voting on.
Yeah, we
really,
should
whether
vote
to
on
go.
each one
Do you want to hear from the city council member who's
and put down the
Develop
number of
this?
votes each one gets?
You mean our
and pass it
liaison?
through.
Nah, we don't want to talk to our
I do.
liaison.
Yeah. And Paul, too.
I always want to hear what city council has to say.
Okay, speaking for both of us with Paul chiming in, we'd like to hear as many options as you'd like to bring to us. We're not interested in 8 to 3 or 10 to 1. We want to know what you support and why. We don't view this as a binary choice of do this or do that, but we think, or meaning you think, there are viable options out there, more than one, and what is it in your criteria that supports that and brings it up to the council? I don't want to worry this point about how many combinations this is. I just don't want good ideas to drop off the table at this level. So I would encourage you to talk about what you can support bringing up and why, without necessarily requiring any kind of majority vote. Anything to add?
Well, I agree with all of that, but it would be nice to have a sense of what the support was for a particular item. I don't know how you do that, so I might disagree with my colleague here. I would like to know if it was 11 to 1, or 11 to nothing, or 5 to 6. I think we should have sort of a some kind of a narrative, or it could be a vote. Strongly supported, lukewarmly supported, but I agree with her that we should have more options presented to us, because we're going to want to know why you excluded something and why you included something. So I do agree with Mary on that. Thanks.
So we vote on all of them, and we submit all of them with a vote on them. They send all 4 options through with a vote.
Well, the way number 2 is written now, I really struggle with the cost of it.
You can do that.
I know, but therefore I can't support moving it forward. So if everybody else wants to,
you don't have to.
And that's kind of what I was getting at on wanting it defined, because I agree with you. I think the idea of moving City Hall into the library and paying for the significant renovations and then building a big shiny new library is kind of doesn't make any sense. It's like you're making the argument that the library that we have is somehow a bad space for a library, yet it can be reconfigured to be a good space for a city hall. That's kind of nonsensical to me. The idea of co-locating City Hall and a library there makes more sense, because you don't have to build a $10 million library to replace the one that's there already, and you still end up with an 8,000 square foot library, which is twice the size of what a typical town of this size has. And you would reconfigure it to be more of a modern version of it that is dedicated to what a library ought to be going forward into the future. I think you could do that in 8,000 square feet. So I think there are versions of moving this thing forward. The one I actually like the least is the idea of building a big giant new library to replace the one we've got on a different property. That doesn't make sense to me.
So that's why I was trying to vote on number 3 and number 4, and then go back to number 2.
That
might be. But I'm fully on board with moving this one forward, and let's see how it all plays out when we mix it up with everything else. We haven't even gotten to that. We're still sitting here on City Hall without grand integrated proposals yet.
I think covering 3 and 4 next is a good idea. However, I'd also like to revisit one of the items on number 1.
No, we're done with number 1. I'm sorry, we're not going to.
Number 3.
Well, just a minute. I would like to take 2 2B and add it to 1. I have a concern that once things are in writing and they're voted on and there's a tally of votes, that they tend to take on a life of their own and get locked in. 2B is something that's been discussed in the context of a new City Hall building, and I think it should be tied into number 1 so that that concept of a multiple uses within a new City Hall is front and center.
You know,
Can I ask something?
I'm going to have to say no, because we went through this. We went through the City Hall building. We came up with the alternatives. We came up with how we group things together. We are where we are.
How did we come up?
Changing City Hall. Now you want City Hall to include another floor on it, so you can have that's just not anywhere where we went. And City Council is going to talk about it anyway. And you can go to City Council meeting and you'd express to them that you think it maybe ought to be a little bit different.
Can I make a statement that isn't City Hall going to decide what they want in their building in the first place?
Yes.
So, I mean, we could say that, but they have the decision on what they want to put in the building that they build.
But why are we locked into, A through F under each item? Why isn't there more fluidity?
We aren't. We're talking about a conceptual box called City Hall and the police station.
But there are some pretty significant sub-items listed under these categories that if the category gets voted down...
The sub-items aren't going forward.
Well, then I think we need to add 2B to number 1.
Just do it, man. Great. I've got kids that I don't get to kiss goodnight every Wednesday.
I don't know if I need to make a motion, because I feel pretty strongly about that.
When the City Council just said, give us a vote on each one and pass it forward. We could knock this out in a half hour, the whole list. This is asinine.
I disagree with that.
Let's not be quite so sharp there, but...
I'm happy being sharp. This is ridiculous.
I have to say something to the gentleman in the room. If there's one thing I've learned being on this committee, it's that we need to elect more women to political office. Thank you.
Pat, I mentioned tonight that I love your hair, and I do. I would like to say that all we're trying to do is get a list of stuff that the City Council can look at, and they will carry a pencil or a pen, and they'll go, hey, I kind of like this one and that one, and let's tie these together and make this one good idea. So we're just putting the ingredients, and they're going to mix it together however they want. So whether it's a half a teaspoon of vanilla or a full teaspoon, they'll decide.
I can support number 2 with the concept of a cultural center. I'm more than happy to have it go to City Council, the concept of a cultural center on Main Street in place of the City Hall now, and with the idea that we'll see how it may work with the library. Right? Is that, Tim, basically what you were saying?
Yeah, good enough.
Where's the cultural center listed under these 4 options? I didn't see it.
It's in 2E.
Yeah. 2B is the one that I'm interested in combining with number 1. I think it's important enough to...
Fine.
Let's just move it up there so we can move on.
I'm happy putting it up.
Otherwise, I'm going to have to lobby for number 2, and I really support number 1.
My impression, these sub-bullets were not the definitions of each of those. They were
that's what I just
that
heard.
were listed. They're not the definitions. So,
well, that's what I just heard. I heard that these sub-bullets were specifically grouped together under these each of these 4 categories.
I think they just captured what
it's a bundle.
It's not. The thing behind the number is the definition. The rest of these are just kind of things that were captured and thrown
And if
down.
that's true, then it doesn't matter
right.
that in number 2, E, possibly build a cultural center. That doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. If the subcategories don't matter and it's not important, to hear Stan's request, I happen to agree with him, by the way, to put 2B up into 1. Either they're important or they're not important. And so we need to decide that. If they're not important, we should just cross them all out and vote on the main category.
I wonder if we could just vote on what's going to go up and then go back when we have a moment and just visit the sub-bullets and change them if we want to, not tonight, but another time if we have the time to do it.
Can we just add 2B, add that B line to 1? Can we all agree that it just goes in both places?
Yes.
Let's just have it. Does anybody care that it's in one?
No.
Okay, done.
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 Thank you.
Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank God.
Do you want to vote on number 2, or do you want to go to 3 and 4?
I think we already voted on 2. Didn't we do this?
I think number 2 goes forward to the city council.
With the vote.
Take a vote.
The vote.
Okay, what's the vote on 2 moving forward? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? And number 3, move City Hall to another existing building. 3, 4. 4. Rebuild City Hall on Adams Street. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5?
6. Make it 6.
Oh, 6? 6? Okay. Ready to do the library? Or
Yeah, the library, and it'll take me just 1 minute. I have spoken with the library staff and the library director. I'm at the library a lot because the Historical Society has their offices there, and I know how busy we all are there. My thought right now is maybe in the future we need to do something different to the library, but at this time, with everything else that needs to be done immediately and priority-wise, I would like to say that the library remains the library for now, that we implement the repairs that EMG has stated need to be done, and that somehow maybe the city and the library director and the staff there could find someone that can help them redesign the interior, possibly for additional or other uses that might work for whatever they deem necessary. I think at this time, this is going to take quite a few years to implement anyway, so at this time it should remain the library.
Okay, I'll follow. The library building is charming, but it's old. Therefore, I'd like to propose plans for the immediate future and for a later date. I think the EMG suggested repairs should be done as soon as possible. I'd like to see the city hire a space planner utilization expert to assess the use of the space. Even there are numbers showing numbers of visits, etc., this is not adequate information. It could be the same person visiting the library 10 times in 1 week. So I'd like to see somebody come in and look at that building and see if, in fact, the functions that are in there could be consolidated into less space. And the reason I'd like to see that happen is because our library is, in essence, our current community center. This should be accommodated. If possible, consolidate the functions so that there could be space left over for a room that I'm going to call a little theater. It should be soundproofed, almost like a recording studio. Because I've heard that sometimes when the programs are going on, it's disturbing to the people who are using the library for its basic function, studying or research or just looking for a book. So I'd like to see a room created in which not only can the programs that are done now go on, but I would like to see that even expanded. The library already has staff. Interesting numbers that we heard from a member of the public tonight about the numbers of staff. I'd like to look at those numbers better later. But I think even if it's necessary to maybe hire a half of an FTE or something in order to staff those programs, I don't think
I'm thinking that might be a little weeds. That's operational.
Okay.
Right? And you've got to redesign with...
Okay, so I'll go on to the future. My future idea is if and when the city is able to build a community cultural center, I think the library could be part of that complex. The redesign desired by some of our committee could then be incorporated into the new library. It could be brought into 21st century library science, but it could certainly be part in the future of that new center. Thank you.
Could I jump in here? Because I agree with both Pat and Suzanne. I think we need to make the EMG recommended repairs as soon as we can, and at the same time begin a process of redesigning the interior space of that, and even maybe the exterior if it's required, so that it can fulfill its mission for many years to come. Because I think what we have in our library is right now the cultural center of the cultural heart of what we have, what culture we have here in St. Helena, surrounds that library and the library itself. And it seems to me that the property around that is the future of the culture in St. Helena, that if we ever get to it, we should try to build a cultural campus around that with lots of open space, eventually a big enough space to accommodate the kind of, if we think big, if we imagine big, the kinds of events that we could have here, cultural conferences, not TED Talks. If you don't like TED Talks, you can watch those on your computer. I have nothing in favor of Aspen. I've lobbied against Aspenization of St. Helena for years, but I recognize good when I see it, and what they do there is amazing culturally. What they do in the Camden area, the Camden Conference, and the different conferences, that could all end up here in St. Helena. There's no reason we are not doing that. And that brings in TOT, because that brings in people who stay overnight, which means a few more hotels. That also brings in more sales tax. But most importantly, what that does for this town is it inspires our children and our elderly and every one of us, because you get to watch truly world-class people talking about world-class things, dancing, music, and other things.
Thank you.
I'm going to go next because I'm actually in quite a lot of agreement with you three. I kind of mentioned this earlier. The argument for our what I think is oversized library and very expensive library is that it's already serving as a community center, maybe cultural center. I think we should recognize that and amplify it. And so I agree a little bit with both your present and future concept that we ought to get somebody in there to analyze what kind of space a modern library needs, carve off part of that building and redesign it to do that, but recognize the fact that this is a community serving space, and redesign the other side of the building to do things like you talked about, to provide meeting spaces that groups that need a place to meet. It's sort of a mishmash around town. They could come in and rent at a reasonable fee or whatever space in here. Make it a community meeting space. And I think, in your idea, that it should integrate with the adjacent space on the Adams Street property, because that is being earmarked as sort of a community space. Put the indoor space and the outdoor space together, make them as seamless as you can, and you start to create the community center on that corner, and then it can evolve back into the property as more and more of these things come to fruition. So I would just go ahead and make that recommendation right now and not wait for it. Don't just make repairs and punt it down the road. Let's go ahead and define what we think we want to do with this space and get it out in front of the city council right now. I think I'll stop there.
Okay. The only difference I have with all of those comments is that my suggestion is you start with a blank piece of paper and not with a set of walls. So you could begin with the idea of what should the space be, and if it happens to fit in walls that sort of look like the existing library, great. If it doesn't, then don't lock yourself into a set of walls.
So, Glenn, which one of these alternatives is that?
As far as I'm concerned, I have no idea. I looked at the library as integral with the decisions around City Hall, and have made no further comments or written material on what to do with the library.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't actually summarize what I was voting for. It was the redesign that I talked about with the community center sort of space, and I still like the idea of co-locating City Hall with the library. Sort of you split the same kind of concept. You split the 17,000 into 9,000 for the City Hall space, and you've got 8,000 left to design a modern library in that space. So those are my two favorite options. I don't know how they correspond to these 5 numbers here, but those are my two.
excuse me, I'm fine with either keeping the library there, relocating it to the City Hall site, or combining City Hall with the library. I think they're all good ideas. I think they all have benefits, and I think when you start running the numbers out, that'll help make the decision. I don't think we should alleviate any of those for the list for the council.
Okay. I like doing the repairs that need to be done, the redesign, talking about bringing somebody in, an expert. I think that's great. And then also, I think the problem here is that there is an idea, for me, that what you're talking about, I like the idea it has to be integrated with Adams Street. I know we're not talking about that here or anywhere. Okay. So I don't know how we talk about that, but that's the time to look at it and change it, and I'd like to support that. At least we're having it all be seamless and go together.
Yeah.
It sounds like Anna would like to add something to, well, I like number one, and I like the idea of adding, hiring a library expert to take a look at the library of the future.
I think I agree and disagree with a lot of aspects, unfortunately, but what I would say in regard to the library building structure itself is it makes a very easy City Hall. I appreciate the work that EMG did, and they'll probably be the first to tell you that their estimates on cost to do these things are not gospel. And it's an easily amended building structurally, and the facility needs for a City Hall program versus a library program are light years apart. So.
Can I add a footnote to my comment on the library? I do not at all favor utilizing that space for City Hall functions.
For me, I'm sort of down to, sort of combining alternatives 1 and 5, which is implement the repairs and redesign the possible interiors for other civic. I think there are some other civic uses that happen. There is a little bit of a community aspect, so I think 1 and 5 kind of go together. I do resist the desire and the temptation that.
Do you mean 1 and 4?
No, 1 and 5.
I got 5.
I had 5. Implement repairs and design and redesign interior possibly for additional or other uses.
That's number 1, isn't it?
That's 1 and
another
5.
one.
Oh, you're using it.
Huh. I don't know. Maybe I'm. Okay. Maybe 5 went away somehow? I don't know. I'm looking at what got sent to us on.
Yeah, I'm looking at the one that we.
No, I know, and I'm looking at what we got in the March 21st meeting. So I don't know.
Yeah,
anyway,
me too.
I guess it all sort of goes together. Implement repairs and redesign and include some community uses. That's I think similar to what Tim's saying and some others are saying. I'm resisting the idea of just wholesale, just remodeling and refurbishing or switching out the uses. I don't think we have to touch. Every building doesn't have to have this major upheaval in it, And we have some items that are priorities and some things that do definitely need to be fixed. But I look at the library and it's like it's working. So why do we have to just flip the whole thing on its head and change what's going on there? So I really am dead set against the whole City Hall thing, going in and consuming it or even using half of it. Maybe if you want to use some civic, community functions there, that's fine. I think that's kind of consistent with a little bit of what happens now, but, moving City Hall into it or moving City Hall into part of it or, just remodeling the whole dang thing and integrate. I resist that every single building and property we've talked about, we have to do some major work on. Anyway, that's my comments.
I'd like to suggest that we go with number 1 with the caveat that who's doing the writing? Glenn and Anna?
Tim.
Who else?
Tim.
Okay. That when you write up this one, that you include the other things we talked about tonight, the possibility of having a space planner come in, and the other possibility of creating a room within that space where programs could be more effectively done. If you could just include that in the writing, then we could just vote on this the way it is.
Oliver hasn't spoken, and you haven't done public comment.
Well, this is a great opportunity to kind of get it right, and there's going to be some serious money being spent no matter how you look at it. So, and we're in transition, you know. The world is changing, and it's changed already. And so this is a great time to re-examine what is the purpose of the library, what are they trying to do. I mean, I see the library as it was always the key point for information and to ascertain knowledge. And it was always like a giant depository for books. And that world's kind of changing a little bit. It's all kind of gone digital. I know.
You just spoke to that
I know, but
half an hour ago.
I know, but what I'm trying to get at is that, I imagine trying to have some kind of cultural function at the City Hall to have an integration with Lyman Park and leave the library where it is. But what's happening is the library is a de facto community center because it does have art shows. It does have flamingo. It does have poetry readings. It does have music. No? Yeah, I mean, I'm getting the nod. There's a lot going on there, and here's the background that concerns me. I would love to see a really great library where more people are using it because it offers more services to the public, because there's all kinds of great things going on. You can go in there and there's this huge screens and a lecture series about, okay, I know. So, but this costs money also, and that's why I like the idea of getting revenue out of Adams, because I like the idea of a bigger budget for the library so that it can properly grow where it's trying to go. I mean, it's contracted. And I would like that money to be kind of passed around to the other communities also. So I look at Adams as a revenue machine to help shore up all these community functions, and so they can do the job that they want to do and serve the public better. That costs money. And so to the idea of remodeling this old building, and it was never designed for the 21st century. And so I just think that it's just... I know what the kind of facilities you would need. It's the same argument when the art museum was in the War Memorial Building in San Francisco. It was an old building, and they never could showcase the great art. They could never get great shows, and there was talk about maybe we had to rebuild this, and there was all this resistance. But this is our charming building. This is our heritage. It's on Van Ness. I heard all this, and then somebody pushed the idea of a whole new building in a whole other area. And thank God that they did, because they came up with a better context for the future, so they can ascertain their growth. Sometimes when you have these old buildings, you're kind of like a fishbowl. You can't go beyond the fishbowl. The fish can't get bigger. So I'm all for number 3.
Okay. Public comment? Are we ready for that? Everybody's spoken, yes?
For the library.
Navarro. So I think the library is a spectacular building. I think it's a big building. There's a lot of love for it. And so I think the idea of multi-use is a good idea. Part of the reason that the library building is so spectacular and world-class is because of where it sits. It sits with magnificent views in all directions of amazing mountains, our beautiful Mount St. Helena, sunsets, vineyards. It's a spectacular setting. So keep the library, but start having it bring in some revenue. And it certainly can do that. It's closed at night. Start having meetings there, corporate meetings. Have wedding rehearsal parties there. Let the library start to earn revenue. It's an expensive library. It's over $1 million a year in cost to the city. So, I mean, there's no reason why it can't be reconfigured to some extent. The outside of that building has some of the most spectacular views any place I've ever been. And anyone who's walked down there can say that. It's true. The building is beautiful. Make it look inside like a place that somebody would want to rent for some kinds of activities, corporate meetings, et cetera, et cetera. Charge a fee for it, and then start to earn some revenue back on that building and maintain it as a library during the day and the hours that it's opened. It's not open every minute of the day either. So just an idea to keep the library, to keep the building, to keep the magnificence of where it stands, and to also build maybe something outside, patio, and indoor, so that it can be multi-use. We're a teeny little city. Let's make everything maximized.
Bonnie Thurine, 497 Crane Avenue, San Helena, California. I have just a couple of things to say. Number one, Mark, I agree with you completely. The library is functioning. It's functioning beautifully. It's a place that people feel welcome. And even though you don't see every single seat taken, those resources are being used in the 21st century. I will argue that one with you. And I would also suggest that square footage does not tell the whole story. 17,000 square feet in that building, much of it is not usable. I would challenge the city staff to go there and say, how will we fit into this building? I really don't think it can be done. I give kudos to the library and the library staff. It is one of our finest resources in this community. Thank you.
Any more public comments on the library?
Jack Stewart, 22 Crane Avenue. And first of all, Mark, I want to correct you. That letter was from Friends and Foundation of the St. Helena Public Library, which is not the library trustees. The library trustees are the committee appointed by the city who deal with the operations and the funding of the operations of the city. Our organization raises funds for enhancements and improvements to the library and to advocate for the library. And I should have stated at the beginning that I am the chair of the board of directors of Friends and Foundation, St. Helena Public Library. And probably most of what I'm going to say in the next minute or two is my own opinion about this. This is very early for us to be talking about details about the size of the building and how it will be decorated and what color it's going to be and what way it will face. Our job is to fundraise and advocate for an institution, not a building. We are in favor of the best library we can afford in the city of St. Helena. And if that can be done in the existing building with improvements, I'm all for it. If we can somehow figure out how to build a small town library like the one in Los Gatos in Santa Clara County, I'm for that too. That's a wonderful, maybe that's a 22nd century library. It's a wonderful modern space that can be used in many different ways. There's all sorts of light coming in from the hills behind it. It's separated from the main street by a park. It's beautiful. If you've been to Bozeman, Montana, you would have seen another public library recently built by architects who specialize in building libraries. So we don't want to just bring in a space consultant. We want to bring in a library consultant, and we want to talk to the library staff and library staffs and library directors from other places so we get the best thing. I think I want to congratulate all of you for signing up for this difficult process you're in the middle of. It's amazing to think that you started in October, and there's still so much to do. I happened 3 years ago to be on the Revenue Sources Task Force. We didn't meet as often as you did, and we didn't have as many meetings as you've already had, but I'm sympathetic for the time you've put in, the thought you've put into this, and your ability to debate with one another mostly with good nature. So congratulations. One thing that needs to be considered, however, for anything that's done to the building that would be significant, such as housing City Hall there or tearing it down and moving it maybe who knows where, is that in the late 70s and again in the late 90s, many citizens of this town raised most of the money, first to build it in 1979 and then to increase it in 1998. And in today's dollars, the amount of money that was raised by citizens, businesses, and other people other than the county of Napa and other than the city of St. Helena raised $3.4 million in today's dollars. So we need to credit and accommodate and account for that money that was raised for the existing library. That doesn't mean we can't build a wonderful new library somewhere in town if that's what the city's decision is, and with the support of citizens. But I think we need to honor and somehow account for all that money that was raised 20 years ago and 40 years ago. Yes, the building may be coming up to the end of its useful life in many ways, and those things need to be addressed. So my final statement would be, as advocates and fundraisers for the St. Helena Public Library, our organization is not taking an opinion, is not giving an opinion on the building per se. We stand for preserving the institution itself, wherever that may be, and however the city and the citizens decide it to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Public comment on the library? Okay, we'll close public comment.
Could I make another comment? You know, yeah, we were assigned several assets by the City Council to evaluate. The library was one of them. I don't want anyone who supports the library, which I support as well, to have the impression that any of us are demeaning the function or the quality of the library, because we're not. We were simply asked to evaluate an asset. We were given figures, accurate or not, from E&G on what it would cost to repair it, what's the value of it, etc. Cosmont really didn't give us any ideas for how we could finance whatever would happen there. But that's all we're trying to do. We're trying to do what we were given to do, and we don't mean in any way to denigrate the library or its function or its staff.
Any more discussion, comments, questions? Okay.
Options moving forward. So the first one that I have on this sheet is to implement repairs and redesign to fit changing needs of library meeting space. I think that's a combination of two of them probably on that other sheet. So implement repairs and redesign to fit changing needs of library, possibly meeting space. Those who want that to go forward? 3, 4, 10. Remodel, rebuild, and integrate with other city uses such as City Hall. So that's your multi-use.
That's multi-use, mixed library and another function.
Yeah.
Is it specific to City Hall, though?
Such as. It says such as City Hall.
I'm good for integrating some other stuff, but I don't know that I'd want to get lost into saying that it had to be City Hall.
I agree. If you could cross that off, I could vote for it.
With other city uses and just cross off such as City Hall?
Yep.
All right. Voting on that, moving forward? I am now. I'm hoping to. One.
Voting on? Crossing off City Hall? Yep.
Yeah, what you asked for.
Okay.
Go.
Wait. What do you have? What's on your list? Because mine. Oh, something got changed around. Okay.
We're looking at the document that I pointed to you that we used with the focus groups. That's the large documents that has been at your table. I mean, at your place.
No, that's fine. I don't know why it's different than it's here.
So the second one that we're voting on is remodel or rebuild and integrate with other city uses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Well, I don't know how it's much different than one.
The third is build new city library on City Hall property with a cultural center and incorporate Lyman Park. It anchors Main Street and draws foot traffic. 1, 2, 3. 3. Remodel for City Hall. 1, 2,
Well, whatever. Yeah.
3, 4. 4. Are there others?
Are you asking if there's other options?
Yeah, you talked about a couple of different ones, or you're saying you're looking at a different document. Is there some other option that's not on this one?
No, I think it got combined with something else. It's fine.
Okay. I got it. Carnegie. The Carnegie building, it's 9 o'clock. Do you still ready to move on? Okay.
I'd like to comment on that. I'd be willing to move on to the Carnegie building, but not the Adams Street property. I think that needs to be done in a separate meeting.
Yeah.
Carnegie building. First option is sell. Possibilities underneath that are not at all locked in, but part of what you were talking about is offer to the Historical Society for $2 million, which is $1 million below assessed value, or set as a life estate or some other type of deed revision. The other option under there, and then to use the money for other needs, revert in deed. So selling, one of the options could be to the Historical Society, but this option, I think, is primarily selling it. Right? The second one is keep, repair, and maintain. Get more information from Parks and Recs on their use and cost to know what kinds of fixes they need. The third one is long-term lease to the Historical Society. The fourth one is lease to artisans or some other income-producing entity. Your input.
I would just like to say I would not want to sell this unless it went to somebody like the Historical Society that was part of the community. Repairing it makes sense. I heard the elevator is actually fixed, so that's the good news of the day. The elevator in the Carnegie building's fixed. Thanks, Mark. We don't have to sell this thing. We're going to get a few bucks for it. We're going to spend it on something, but I don't think we need to do that. Let's just hold on to our real estate.
And I would say absolutely not to sell it. I wish the Historical Society was flush with $2 million that they could buy it, but I don't think that probably is any possibility that we could do. Perhaps it might be. We don't know. But keep and repair and maintain, that would be awesome. Number 3 is an important one for us that go to the city, because as a Historical Society, we have to go out of town to display our artifacts in other communities because there's no place here. And a long-term lease for us while we're raising money to build our facility would be a wonderful thing for us. Lease to artisans or some other income-producing entity. I would hate to see it used for office space or anything like that. So that's where I stand on that.
I could support numbers 3 and 4.
I support 2, 3, and 4. I think 2 is still needed with Parks and Recs to use the space for the programming that's going on until we have another alternative. Long-term lease?
Yes, long-term lease. Could I add something about the Parks and Rec? Being as we're talking about that for Parks and Rec, I think the city perhaps could look into a partial lease of the school. They have a fabulous gym. They have a wonderful office space at the end where the gym is, and there's other rooms that they might be able to use until their space, wherever they end up going, could be in use. Plus, there's parking, plus there's the Boys and Girls Club across the street. So that could be a possibility for Parks and Rec instead of the Carnegie.
I think I'd combine 3 and 4. I would lease it to whoever will pay market rates. Doesn't seem like we need to distinguish who it's going to be necessarily. And probably keep number 2 on the list as well.
I like number 2, but I'd love to hear from Parks and Rec about how much they're using it, how long they think they'll be using it, and if they prefer to be in, say, the Catholic school, if they could be rented, have all of their programs in one place. And then otherwise, I think long-term lease to the Historical Society would be a good use for it as well. Especially if it's not the entire building, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but so that there'd be room for other things if they had to come along.
Just an observation with respect to leasing to the Historical Society, and that is that raising money for our administration or ongoing leasing expenses, my experience is that's really tough. Probably much better if the Historical Society considered leasing the property for a period of time with the idea that they would use that period of time to raise the money to buy the building. So a 3-year lease with an option to buy. At the end of that period of time, I guess leasing the building to whoever was willing to pay for it or selling it. It's not very well configured as a recreational building, and the cost to renovate it to make it really useful to Parks and Rec, I think, would be prohibitive.
The only thing I have to add is that the city is in need of public restrooms, and there's ADA access to the bottom of Carnegie Building, push button and all. There's a kitchen in the bottom that nobody ever seems to use, and that kitchen space could be very economically amended to serve as 2 public restrooms for the city.
Good idea.
Could I make an amendment too? It seems to me that that building is across the street from virtually every church in town, that it could ultimately be used as like Native Sons is, that gets $1,000 a day for their rentals and are booked months in advance. So it seems to me that if we had somebody on staff, if the recs people didn't want it, or if the Historical Society doesn't want to pay for the leases on it, there might be something that we could generate income for wedding receptions and all the things there, as well as other citizens' uses, yoga classes and all the other things.
How much was that Native Sons fee?
$1,000. And it was booked 3 months out. How much is that? $1,000 a day, 3 months. Amazing. I know. It's not as big, but it could serve. Partially, we could make quite a bit of revenue there, I think.
Oliver and Stan?
I don't think we should sell it immediately, if at all. I think we should take care of the immediate repair needs, the elevator, and somehow mitigate the water intrusion in the basement, and then see if there are opportunities to lease the space, potential location for the Historical Society, and also we could work with program users that have classes and scheduled programs in the space. So I guess my first priority on the Carnegie Building would be to do the repairs that are recommended at a minimum.
Thank you.
That brings me to a question. If it were leased to the Historical Society, would the city have to do I can't remember, is it $88,000? Somebody who has,
I think it's behind you, Pat.
Right behind you.
the repair costs?
$81,000.
Okay, I was close.
And $500.
Would the city be obligated to do that $81,000 worth of repair before it's leased? I think that's something that needs to be discussed.
We can't really handle that in the scope of our group because it would be predicated by a lot of other items within that lease, the number of years for the term, who the tenant was, the amount of contribution from the tenant toward tenant improvements, something else they might ask for. So I think it's a pretty safe bet that if there's $80,000 worth of deferred maintenance on this building, the city would be well served to rectify those before leasing it to somebody else. Otherwise, that person may not fix them. Then that 80 turns into 160, then 320, then they move out, and then we got a bigger problem.
Oliver or Mark?
I look at these assets in the inverse. In other words, would the city want to spend $3 million to buy this building? I always look at these things the opposite way. And, it's like 5,000 square feet at $2 a foot. Jeff, is that unreasonable? 10,000 a month, and then it'd be triple net, right? Taxes, insurance, maintenance, the roof. So, you really have to look at the hard dollars of what it would cost to lease that space for any tenant, and you're talking $150,000 to $200,000 a year. If the city wants to be a landlord, the downside is after 10 years, almost half that money goes back into repairs. And so it's not a very good return on investment, this building. And so I think what we confuse is that that there's this assumption that all great historical buildings have to be owned by the government. I mean, I own a historic building. It's on the register. And I paid millions to put that thing back together, and nobody else wanted to do it. So that building might have a better future with a private owner who wants to maintain it, because that thing is always going to be costing money, and it's going to be very hard to find a one tenant to take the whole thing, because that's a big number. No parking. And no parking. $10,000 a month plus triple net expenses on a building like that. And if you take anything less, then you're subsidizing something. And if you're subsidizing something, then I hate to say the word welfare, but then you're favoriting somebody, and I don't know if we're in a position to be favoriting, I'm sorry, Suzanne, one community over another community group. And so this is kind of a conundrum, this building. But you can't do anything until we resolve the issue with parks and City Hall and where that's going and a cultural center, because if you do build a cultural center, community center, whatever it is, and it can absorb some of the tenants and yoga and Tai Chi and what goes on there, then the building has less meaning. If the building has less meaning, then you're free and clear to really look at it in the hard way and say, should we own this thing or take the $3 million and move on and apply it to things that really mean something? Because otherwise the inverse is we're actually buying the building for $3 million. And in my opinion, I would never buy that building for $3 million from an investment point of view.
Could I make just one little clarification? Maybe there's a lot of you that don't realize that the city owns the Historical Society. Everything we have belongs to the city. It's not a private organization. It all belongs to the city.
So can we auction it all off and then pay people?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I didn't say that. Rewind the tape. Carnegie Building, it's kind of one of those funny places. I guess I could get my head wrapped around selling it to the highest bidder, or, if we're talking about sending, alternatives on to city council, and I guess we're sort of maybe kicking the can down the road, but, you could go with selling it to the highest bidder, keep it and make the EMG fixes and let Park and Rec keep using it till they don't need it anymore, and add some other community things, because there's a lot of people wanting to rent things out for community space, and then, or leasing it to the highest bidder as well. I would combine 3 and 4. So, I could see all 3 of those. They're not complicated. They could all go to city council, and they could all be put into the ultimate matrix. So, because, I mean, depending on how much, public input there is on the Carnegie Building, what City Council believes, I mean, we could use the money to do the other things we're talking about. So I'd sort of suggest sending all three of those to them.
I think that's a very civilized thing to do. Can we get public comment and just move the three forward?
Oh, you want to kiss those kids, don't you?
It's open for public comment if anybody has any public comments on the Carnegie Building. Here we go.
Jack Stewart again. I don't really have a dog in this fight other than I do go to yoga there, Oliver, and I really like it for yoga. And I suppose if we sold it or leased it, somebody could come in and build yet another restaurant that I can't afford to go to. So I'm being facetious, but I think perhaps you should keep in mind, as I said about the library, that the city spent a lot of money in 2010 and I think once before in recent history to upgrade the building. So bear in mind that the city has already spent significant money rehabbing the building. I don't remember whether there was any public or volunteer contributions to that. But we should, I think when we're talking about selling off or changing the purpose of buildings, we just need to understand the history. And I'm sorry I don't remember all of it, but there is a plaque on the front wall that says 2010 and Del Britton Mayor and all of this stuff, including, I think, putting the elevator in, were done about that time. So, thank you.
Thank you.
And Bonnie Therina again, 497 Crane Avenue South, St. Helena, California. This is a building which I feel kind of passionate about because I worked there when I first moved to St. Helena, when it was still the library. And it is a building that is of historic significance. And I think it would be a wonderful asset if we could convert it into a city magnet for the Historical Society. I think that would be a very positive move. Right now, it is not generating much money at all. It's not very well utilized. I'm sure you've done your homework on that. So I would really like you to consider the fact that it is historic, and for the Historical Society to be linked to it would be a nice fit. Also, many other cities around the country have converted their Carnegie buildings into historic sites for their local artifacts and museum space. We don't want to call it a museum, historical center space. And I would very much like you to put that in the positive column of your thinking. Thank you.
Any other public comments? Okay, we'll close public comment on Carnegie Building.
Did you have more comments, or are we ready to vote?
I had one comment. I'd be fine with selling it or leasing it to the Historical Society, given the historical significance of the building and that sort of thing. But
Your mic.
thank you. Sorry. I'd be okay with the historical selling it to them, to the Historical Society, or leasing it to the Historical Society. My concern is, though, if I remember the comment right from Suzanne in an earlier meeting, you suggested it was too small and it would only be temporary. So if it's temporary, I certainly wouldn't want to sell it to the Historical Society, who then gets to flip it 5 years from now and make a couple $1 million off of it if prices go up. So, anyway, that's my one comment about the Historical Society being in the Carnegie Building.
So the first option is selling, whether it's to the Historical Society or anybody else. Does that move forward?
Selling it, period.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who.
Right, just selling it. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Keep it, repair, and maintain. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8. Long-term lease to the Historical Society.
Yeah, that should be
Three.
Any,
and four. We combined
3 and
three.
4? So to whoever, long-term lease, period.
Long-term lease period.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. Do you have another one in you?
Nope. What other one?
Fire station?
Yeah, John's here.
We'll do the fire station, and then we'll leave the Railroad Avenue properties and Adams Street for the next one.
Yep.
So the options you had to move forward are implement fixes identified in the EMG report out of general funds in next year's budget. That was a rather specific recommendation I remember from before. Add a second story for combined police and fire and public meeting space. And then combine police and fire in a way that works. Possibly add another building for police integrated into fire station, especially if City Hall moves to another site. What's your thinking?
I would advise that we just put all three down for the city to consider.
Second.
Third.
Fourth.
Aye, aye.
Public comment?
So we can open up the fire station for public comment if anybody has any. All right, close public comment.
Is there anybody opposed to putting them all together and moving forward?
Yeah, I'm going to suggest that number 2 isn't realistic. I think, and anyway, you're sort of dealing with number 2 in number 3. I mean, number 2 is just basically saying combine the police somehow with the fire department, and number 3 is basically saying combine the police with the fire department. So it's. I mean, just look at the options for combining them in a certain way that works. So it's really 1 and 3 as far as I'm concerned,
Right.
and not specific to a second story.
Yeah, the only difference is that public meeting space thing, and that's a weed, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Already exists.
Right, 1 and 3.
Are you okay with that, Pat?
I'm fine.
Okay, let's do it.
Anybody opposed? So 1 and 3 together, you want to just vote just to make sure we've got a number on these? No?
No, we don't need to.
It's just going to
I think
be,
it's unanimous.
it's unanimous, great.
Do we get to say anything about the siren?
They're watching X-rated movies anyway. Don't worry about it.
No, they are not. Sweet baby.
So next week is Adams Street and the Railroad Avenue properties.
Hurry up, Joshua.
Then we have a week off after
Yes.
that?